What's up, St. Louis sports fans? Thanks for tuning in to tonight's brand new show here. It's the City SC show. We're going to be talking about the game against Sporting KC, a little bit of look into the game against the pretty solid Columbus Crew from the sounds of it, and then a little bit of a rumor already in the transfer side of things. We'll talk all about all that stuff here in just a second. Oh man, Chris, it's been a while since we've had a nice little conversation about
it has been. It's nice to be out with you, Brandon.
So how have you been?
Good. I was probably better about 3 weeks ago when the season was getting off to a really, really good start for City, and things have turned a little bit. And I'm sure we'll talk about that and kind of recap what's gone on. But no, all good, and it's always nice to get a chance to talk to you as always. So
yeah. No, it's been a little bit, and the way this season has started out really, really well. With the looks of things, and they started out 2-0, right? 2-0-1 or on that order.
2-2-0. So 2 wins, 2 draws, and 0 losses.
That's it.
They were unbeaten in their first 4.
I had my wins and draws or losses and draws.
Yeah, soccer is we always do wins, draws, losses, which is it throws people sometimes, and there's even a constant debate in the MLS community of what should we list first, or should we do wins, losses, draws, whatever. So
just been watching too much hockey, that's all.
Yeah, first 4 games went well though, and I did the Battered Fans MLS show out of Miami right after the 4th game, and all the vibes are good, everything's going great. We had some concerns about the offense and the lack of production, but hey, winning kind of cures all those concerns, right? And when you're getting points, and the season had started so well that it was all good. And what a difference 3 weeks makes. So we'll get into it. So
I mean, it's been and I do my absolute best to just keep up on not just City, but every sport here, or at least professional sport in St. Louis. The fact that they haven't really, it's been 3 weeks since they've scored a goal.
Correct. Yes.
Sadly,
yes.
That's never a good thing.
Yeah. They are, through 7 matches. They have been shut out 5 times. They put up a 3 spot on the Galaxy, which was nice to see that outburst. They got 1 goal against Seattle on a nice free kick by Edward Lubin. But other than that, it's been pretty desert-like when you talk about the offense for City so far this year, for various reasons. And we've had injury issues that have kind of plagued. Again, we had struggled with injuries last year, had injuries and really challenged the depth of this team, which was going into the year, one of their strengths was going to be their depth. And it's really kind of been a challenge for them so far. And then also you have a new manager who rightly or wrongly has started to get a little bit of criticism on his tactical decisions, on his lineup decisions, on his roster makeup. And really we can get into it as far as kind of the criticisms of what Malberg has done so far this year. But there's been a lot of things that have contributed to this. And, unfortunately, City is staring down the barrel of a 5-game stretch coming up that is about as brutal as you could possibly, look at in this league. And so it's going to be a real challenge for them. And it's going to start Sunday with the Eastern leading, Columbus Crew, one of the best teams in the league, one of probably the 2 best coaches in the league, and Wilfred Nancy. And so, it's definitely going to be a challenge coming up for sure.
Yeah. Columbus, and just looking at so they got 7 games so far, 4 wins, 3 draws, and they're +5 in their goal differential. And then you get after that one, you get the 2 1 seeds back to back. It looks like you get
two conference leaders,
and then Vancouver next week. So that's not a fun trip. Luckily, it looks like they're both home games, so that might help.
They do get them both here. Columbus, which is a Sunday night. MLS this year put in the Sunday night game, which is kind of cool. It's a free game. It's on Fox Sports, and so it's a good advertisement for the league, and that's what really turned to push kind of Sunday night soccer, and it's great. Unfortunately, you want to draw big game, teams for those games, and they're not going to typically give you a matchup of two bad teams going in. So,
Right.
unfortunately, City hasn't played well lately, but they're giving us, the Eastern Conference leaders, a team that won the MLS Cup a couple of years ago. Like I said, one of the two best coaches in the league, and it's Columbus is kind of the neutrals' favorite team. So if you don't have a rooting interest, a lot of people love to watch Columbus because of Wilfred Nancy, because of their coach, whose philosophy seems to be why win 2-0 when you can win 4-0. Soccer is very common. You'll get a goal or two if you're fortunate, and then you'll try to play defense and kind of ride out the rest of the game and hold on to leads.
Mhm.
And his strategy has always kind of been, why do that? Why not just put the hammer down and get another goal or get another 2 goals and put it away? And people like that. People like seeing that type of aggressive, entertaining soccer, and that's always what
Right.
they've played under him. And they're deep and they play aggressively and they're talented offensively. They're fun to watch. I mean, from just an outside perspective, they're fun.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's kind of not what City's been this year, which is not all that entertaining, unfortunately. With their over reliance on defense and kind of Melberg's strategy so far this year of being very defense oriented, which was a problem. Admittedly, was a problem last year. Was their defense was not good,
Right.
for various reasons, but. The kind of sentiment in the fan base now is maybe he went too far to the other side to try to correct it, and has really neglected what we've been able to do offensively. And so I posted earlier in the week, right after the game, actually, is on Saturday night from Kansas. My wife and I were over there for the game. That you can be boring and win, and that's okay, because winning in and of itself is exciting. It doesn't matter how you do it. If you win, it's great, and it covers up a lot of issues and a lot of flaws. And historically, there's been a lot of teams that in a lot of sports that are not necessarily super exciting to watch, but they win and they're effective. And the biggest example of that probably in soccer is Italy. Italy's national team has historically not played the most attractive brand of soccer. It's very defense oriented. It's pretty boring, but they've had success. They've won World Cups with that style, and they're just, that's the way they play. And that's fine. You can be boring and still win, and that's all right. Okay.
Yeah.
You can also be exciting and lose, and there's a lot of, let's say football teams that throw the ball up and down the field, and it's super exciting to go watch those games. And, you're seeing a ton of offense, and there's hockey teams that are like that too, that score a lot, but might they give up a lot of goals? And yeah, they may not win a lot, but the way that they play is exciting. And so that is also kind of okay, right? You still want to win, but
Yeah.
if you're playing in a visually attractive style of soccer or whatever sport you're talking about, that's okay too, right? Yeah. But what you don't want to be is what City's been so far this year, which is boring and not successful.
Yeah.
That's the death. That's the death knell. That's the one thing you don't want to be, is that combination of not interesting to watch and then also not having success.
Right.
And so the first 4 games where they won 2 games and they drew 2 games, that covered up the fact that they weren't necessarily playing a super exciting brand of soccer, a style that was kind of dull, and so that kind of covered it up because you're having success.
Yeah.
Now that you've had 3 straight weeks of no scoring, of 3 straight losses, and we can talk a little bit about what each of those losses meant and how they happened. But
yeah,
now you're starting to see that combination rear its ugly head, which is they're not having success and they're not fun to watch right now. So,
right.
Yeah, it's rough.
Yeah, and you brought up the injury bug. I mean, it's been a little bit of a rough, I'd say rough start. You're losing. I mean, what was there, 5 starters out this past Saturday Saturday night against Sporting. I mean, you have to think that has somewhat of an issue why they are having maybe a little bit of offensive woes.
That contributes to it.
Yeah.
I don't think it's the primary issue because, this was a team that coming into the season, one of the things I talked about on a couple of different shows was that I thought their depth was really going to be a benefit to them. Last year they were so thin in a lot of positions that when injuries happened, they just didn't have quality to step up and to replace those guys. Now it's that they do have depth, but that overall they're just not playing well. They're just not having success, especially offensively, and they've been good defensively, but now what you're seeing, and this is where kind of the questioning of Melberg has started to come in, is some of his roster decisions and some of his tactical decisions are hard to explain in some situations and inexplicable in other situations.
Right.
For example, we played Austin 2 weeks ago, and he rolled out essentially what was a 5-4-1, which is an extraordinarily defensive formation. That's 5 defenders all the way back and 4 in the midfield, and that's at home. And in soccer, especially in MLS, you could justify trying to do that on the road, which happens a lot. You play for a point on the road, just like with hockey, right? You play for a point on the road, you play for the win at home. And he was essentially playing for a point at home, which you just don't do. There's no reason not to be aggressive. There's no reason to be that conservative against an Austin team that was not and is not a high scoring club. Right.
Yeah.
So you were almost giving them too much benefit of the doubt, as a team and Austin had been very good defensively, just as City had been, but you were almost, hamstringing yourself offensively. And City, there was national writers. I know Taylor Twellman as a, Apple broadcaster who's from St. Louis, Matt Doyle, who's one of the Apple guys. They were all like, this formation doesn't make any sense. It's overly conservative, and you're really denying yourself any kind of opportunity to play a forward style at home, which is what you want to do. You want to entertain your fans. You want to come out and be aggressive. And so that was really frustrating. And what was really kind of inexplicable about that game was one of their center back signings from last year, Timo Baumgartel, who has not really gotten an opportunity to play as much as the fans would like. And that whole situation is something we can get into later, but he's a center back, right? So he's a defensive player.
Sure.
He was inserted with 10 minutes to go as a forward to try to generate offense. And you had everybody in the crowd going, what is this? Like, he's not a forward. He's not somebody who can play, up and back. And the roster composition made no sense because they didn't fill the entire roster with eligible players. So they could have brought Caden Glover, who's the kid from Columbia, Illinois, who signed to a first team contract. They would not have had to make any roster moves to just add him to the roster as an extra forward. If they were short or they were thin up front, they could have just made him active for that game. Right. This past week in Kansas, they on a short-term loan from City 2, they brought up Emil Jääskeläinen, who was their first-round draft pick. So at least they kind of addressed it, in the Kansas game to have another body up front, an attacking player. But for Austin, when you needed another attacking player, they had to insert a center back, which makes no sense, right? Other than the fact that he's tall and maybe he could win a header. That's about the only qualification he had to play up front. And I mean, it's some of the decisions from a roster perspective and from a tactical perspective that are really starting to be questioned. And you wonder, okay, yes, they have had injuries. One of the injuries that happened a few weeks ago, which is Thomas Totland, their right wing back, he went down with a hamstring injury. And you look at it and you say, okay, yeah, that's really unfortunate. But it's compounded by the fact that last year's left wing back, who wasn't going to start this year, but he was going to play a lot of minutes, Jaden Reed, suffered an off-season injury, and he's still coming back from surgery.
Sure.
And if we had Jay Reed, then what City could have done is they could have shifted their new signing, Connor Valum, who's been their left back and played tremendous. He can play on the right as well. So you could have shifted Valum over to the right to take Hotland's place when he got hurt. And then you could have put Reed in at left wing back where he played last year. And you're not losing that much in doing that. Okay. Right. But unfortunately, because Reed's still working back from injury, now you have no Totland and you have no Reed. You're stuck having to play Valum at his normal left wing back position, mostly. And then a Kyle Hebert at the other wing back position. And Kyle Hebert is a decent quality backup center back in MLS. He is not a starting wing back in any league. He's just, that is not what he is good at. He's a good soldier and he'll do anything you ask him, but he's just not a starting level wingback, in this league, not even close. And so you're also wind up having to play other guys, or he's choosing to play other guys at center back because they're playing a 3 center back system this year, and with 2 wingbacks. You're starting Josh Yarrow a lot, and which people are like, well, you signed Timo Baumgartel, who is a ball moving center back, who one of the issues they've been having is production of moving the ball out of the back.
Sure.
And you're not playing the guy who is qualified to do that. Why? And he hasn't really explained why he's not getting as much time as fans are expecting. And so you wind up with a back line that's playing Yarrow and Kyle Hebert a lot. 2 guys who are very nice individuals. They're super good guys. Neither one of them should be starting for a good MLS team, at this point in their careers. They're just not. They're good backups, but they're not starters.
Yeah.
So,
the way you're kind of like, the first thing that comes to my head at least is like, is it just fitting pieces until they get the pieces that should be there back?
Yeah, until they get healthy. Yeah. And unfortunately we lost, Giannis Horn, who's another one of the center backs who've been playing very well. So I mean, they are challenged depth wise right now.
Right.
But one of the things that we were sold on when Lutz, signed Olaf Melberg to be the coach here was that he was not tied to a specific formation.
Right.
He was not set on, okay, this is the only style I play as a coach, right? Because there are coaches who are like that. We just had one. Bradley Carnell was like, hey, I play a 4-4-2 or a 4-2-2-2 press, and that's his style.
Right. Once people figure it out, it's hard.
Yeah, we were sold a kind of a thing with Lutz, which was Olaf isn't necessarily tied to any one formation. He can do multiple different things. He can, have his team play in different styles.
Right.
Okay, that's fine. But the problem is we haven't seen that. We haven't experienced that yet. He hasn't shown that, and they played primarily a 3-5-2 or a 5-3-2, whatever you want to call it. Because in soccer, your wing backs can play kind of up or back. It doesn't, it changes what you would technically call it. But you're playing 3 center back system. And in the preseason, they played almost that exclusively. They played a little bit of a 4-3-3 in one preseason game, and that was it. But we haven't seen an adjustment tactically or formationally. And so it's like, okay, if you are running out of bodies that are MLS quality players or MLS quality starters, and playing a 3 center back system isn't working because you just don't have enough guys, then maybe what you have to wind up doing is saying, okay, we're going to shift over and play 4 in the back, right? We're going to tactically make an adjustment or make a formational change. And he hasn't shown the willingness to do that. And so people are justifiably frustrated because, again, we were told that he's not tied to any one formation. He said in press conferences that, this isn't necessarily the style I want to play. I'm playing what I think is best for our personnel.
Sure. I mean,
but again, it's one of those things where it's frustrating sometimes to see players, Celio Pompeo, who was a breakout player last year before he got hurt, had really not gotten a chance to play much at all this year until 2 weeks ago.
Right.
And then he started last week. And it was like, this is one of our most creative offensive players, who's one of the few guys we have who can create offense on his own. He's that good with the ball. He can create opportunities for himself or for other people.
Yeah.
We're already struggling offensively, and yet he's not seeing the field. And that doesn't make sense for people who are looking at it just as a result of saying, okay, we're not scoring goals, and you have talented offensive players that are sitting on the bench. Why?
Yeah.
And so again, you don't want to completely throw Melberg's system or his tactical, kind of strategies out the window after, less than the third of your season.
Sure.
But on the other hand, there are things where it's like, we're not the only ones as fans who are questioning this. There are national level writers questioning, like, we don't understand what he's doing. We don't understand why he's making some of these decisions. They're also the only team in the league that hasn't played a single player under the age of 25 this year. And we were sold also by Lutz was that Melberg, coming from his previous job where he was in charge of the largest youth academy program in all of Europe, hundreds of players in their youth academy for the club that he was coming from, that he is really good at developing young players, and yet we haven't seen any of them. Like we haven't seen a Caden Glover, who I mentioned before. We haven't seen a Mekhi Joyner, who was a City 2 player that led the MLS Next Pro in goals last year. We haven't seen these guys. And if he's really good at developing young players, why are none of them even making the game day roster, much less making an impact? So there's a lot of questions right now about what they're doing.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, that makes, kind of related to how the Blues are kind of dealing with Snuggerud and Dvorsky, and just some of the younger guys that, they're finally getting a little bit of opportunity, a little bit of taste of what the NHL is like compared to Springfield or the OHL or anything on that order. And how big of a difference it actually is, and how much harder how much harder they have to play and whatnot.
For sure. And the speed of the game too is the thing that those guys always talk about, how, especially college.
Yeah.
Because if you've ever watched college hockey and or been to a college hockey game before, the speed is noticeably slower. Like it just is, right? And so that's something that they have to get used to. MLS players, especially younger players coming up, they have to get used not to really the speed of it, it's the physicality. Right. MLS is a very physical league. And that's something, frankly, that a lot of the European players and South American players that come here are taken aback by. They have to oh my gosh, stuff that gets not called in MLS would be called a million times over in Europe and South America, as far as a physicality perspective, right? And so that's something that, I know Miguel Perez, the homegrown from St. Louis that played a lot in 2023 before he went to Birmingham on loan last year. One of the reasons they sent him to Birmingham was to get bigger, to get used to playing against adults, to get, to physically get stronger. And Glover, as tall as he is still not, kind of built, he's still, in his teens. Right. And so he's not going to be a full grown adult yet. Kai Joyner's the same way. They're younger kids. And so the physicality of the MLS is something that I think, it catches a lot of guys off guard. But on the flip side, if you're a team that's offensively challenged right now and you have talented young players who could come and potentially help you, there's no reason not to at least have them on the game day roster, right? Glover not being on the roster 2 weeks ago is inexcusable. And then finally this past week, like I said, Jääskeläinen got the call up. But the way that works with him, Glover has a first team contract, so he can be on the roster and play anytime he wants. He's a City player. Sure. Jääskeläinen is not. Jääskeläinen is signed to a City 2 contract. Yeah. So that means they have to essentially loan him to the big club, but you can only do that a couple times a year. Right. And so
is it 4 times?
I believe so. Yes. So I mean, you have a limited number of times where you can loan that player up to the big club. All right. And so again, they really need to, and again, one of the things that has hurt is Cedric Teuchert's been hurt and he's been kind of in and out of the lineup with injury. And they worked him back in towards the end of the game in Kansas. But I mean, there's just a lot of questions right now about what the plan is to fix this from an offensive perspective. Yeah. And we haven't seen anything yet. As much as you want to give Mellberg the benefit of the doubt, we haven't seen anything yet that shows us that he's able to do it, that he's able to fix these issues. And it can't just all be like, okay, I've just got injuries, right? Every team has to deal with injuries. That's the way that any sports league works. Yeah. Right. Very rarely do you go through a whole season and people don't get hurt. Okay. And so there has to be improvement. The problem is when you look at the season they had 2 years ago and that amazing 5-0 start, to the club's history, what that allowed them to do was to go through struggles later in the year because they had built that buffer of points early. Sure. Right. They got that such off to a great start, and it got them so far kind of out ahead of everybody that they didn't have a good second half of that year. They didn't play well. They were out of gas by the time the playoffs hit. Right. And so really that early season is what carried them throughout the rest of the year. Last year they didn't play well at the beginning. They had all those ties, right? And they weren't getting points and they weren't accumulating enough wins. And so they were really behind the 8 ball when it came to trying to get into the playoffs. And then this year, their stated goal in the offseason was we're trying to make the playoffs. We want to make a good run at it. And now you look at, okay, they're sitting on 2 wins, 3 losses, 2 draws, and their next 5 games are against the 2 conference leaders,
Yeah.
LAFC, who they've never even gotten a point off before, who is
Right.
talented but not playing very well this year. Seattle, in Seattle, which is a game that, that's a very difficult place to play. Yes, we
Right.
did beat Seattle 1-0 here, but that's a tough ask, is getting
Yeah.
points up there. And then San Diego, the expansion team, who, when we went out there and tied them in their home opener, everybody was like, "Oh, that's kind of disappointing. You tied the expansion team." But now everyone's realized that's actually a really good club. San
Yeah.
Diego's playing very well this year. That point looks great, honestly, to get a point out there,
Yeah.
in their place. And so that's 5 games that City will not be favored in. The next 5 games.
Yeah.
And then the 6th one is Kansas.
Yeah.
Right? Your rival who you just lost to. Yeah. So they're in a real danger right now of dropping so many points this early that you're putting yourself so far back that it just winds up that there's too many teams to climb over to get back into that playoff contention.
Yeah.
So they're in a real danger zone in the next 5 to 6 weeks for sure.
Yeah, it does. It's not, I would say it's not looking sunny, down the road a little bit. You brought up the Sporting KC game that you said you were at. I watched a little bit of the highlights and stuff from that one. It looked like they had chances to, especially early on. They had 2 really solid chances with about 15 minutes in and about the 16 and a half minute mark in. They had 2 pretty solid chances to take an early either 1-0 or early 2-0 lead. Early on
for sure. They had
Yeah.
Connor Wallum hit a post.
Yeah.
And I think that game is completely different if that ball goes in.
Yeah.
That the vibes over there right now, that are not good. Kansas is, they hadn't won a game since September of last year.
Yeah.
They're coming off firing Peter Vermees, who was their sporting director / manager for decades. And it was not a full crowd. Their attendance has been lousy over there this year. And against City, we always travel very, very well to go over there. It's one of the highlights of everybody's year is the trip over, because it's, we basically take over one whole corner of that stadium every time we go over there.
Yeah.
And it's great. And this was, by every kind of measurement, the best opportunity that we ever had to win a game there. We still have never won a game there. We've gotten a draw, but we've never won there. And this, coming over there, you're facing a team that's been a dumpster fire for the whole beginning part of this season. Just fired their manager. Bad weather. It was cold and windy that day, so you're not going to have a great crowd. It was City had everything in front of them that was set up for them to get a win.
Right.
And instead, they wound up with what I think, and I stated this kind of right after the game, is the worst loss in club history. I think it really is. Like, some people might point to the playoff loss over there. And in my opinion, that was a team. That was a team that was at the end of their rope, right?
Yeah.
They were exhausted. They had that group. That's as far as that group was going to go.
Yep.
And more power to them. And they had a great, memorable first season, but that was the end of the line for that group of players. They just were not going to do anything. They were done by that point in the season.
Yeah.
The last 3 weeks of that year, it was just a fall off a cliff decline of physical ability, mental, kind of preparedness. They were just beat. It was a long season.
It helped the popularity of City though right away.
Yeah, absolutely.
Be able
I still think that they were too obsessed
1
with trying to set the record for wins.
Yeah.
Then they could have rested some guys. I think they just went for all these records and trying to just make that such a memorable first season. But that first year, I think that team was that was as far as they were going to get. Right.
Right. Yeah.
And so people can say, it was really disappointing to lose over there in the first round. It was. Okay. Obviously everybody was disappointed, but from a perspective of all things being considered, in the brief history of this club, Saturday was the worst loss we've ever had.
Yeah.
Because you're on the road to a rival that, again, hadn't won since last year, calendar year, who just fired their manager. Fans are upset. The stadium atmosphere is not great. You're coming in there with, yes, you have injuries, but you also had enough of your starting core to be able to go in there and get a win. And you come out with a 2-0 loss and once again, not score. And it was as embarrassing as you can imagine, because this was kind of widely considered before the match. This is our best chance that we've ever had so far to get a win over there. And I think if Wallam's goal goes in instead of hitting the post, now you have momentum. We finally scored. The crowd would be super into it on our side. And we've heard all week from people who watched the game who didn't go over there that the noise from our crowd on the Apple broadcast was drowning out Kansas City fans in their own stadium, which is amazing. But Wallam hits the post, unfortunately. And then right after that, or fairly close to that, Akil Watts has a ball that should have been put in. Akil Watts is another guy who, good soldier, is not a starting level MLS player. He's just not. And he's being put into positions right now. And he was starting at right wing back. Like, he's not a quality enough player to start there. And again, it makes me question why, if we are reliant on a double wing back system, which we have been, 3 center backs and 2 wing backs.
Yeah.
If we don't have quality enough players to play those positions well, then you can't play that style. You pick something, play 4 in the back, play something else, because what is being attempted or what is being utilized with these guys who are not MLS quality starters isn't working. Right. Yep. And so you're asking Kyle Hebert to run up and down a wing, or you're asking Akil Watts to run up and down a wing.
Yeah.
Those guys are not starting wing backs in MLS. I'm sorry. They're just not. And so, yes, one of those 2 balls goes in, I think it's a drastically different game. And then after the Nielsen injury, which unfortunately that's something that we've had to say every single year, multiple times every year, which is Joachim Nielsen's hurt. After that, it was a complete shift in what they were trying to do in stylistically, how they were playing, and it felt very deflated. It felt like, oh, well, now that we don't have Nielsen, now we don't know what to do anymore. And that's kind of I don't really understand that.
Yeah.
But you brought Thomas Ostrak in, who's not a like for like. Ostrak is a midfielder, Nielsen's a center back. And they kind of shifted some pieces around. And Conrad Wallam was a revelation. He played amazingly well. He played fantastic in that game. The rest of the team was mediocre at best. Henry Kessler, who's been probably their MVP so far this year, was fantastic as always. But other than that, they just, they were playing too many guys in positions that they shouldn't be playing. Your best player is Marcel Hartl, who was essentially playing so deep to try to cover for Edward Leuven being out, that you're taking your most talented offensive player and you're playing him so far deep that he really couldn't contribute offensively like he should. And you're just mixing too many pieces in the wrong positions. And so that's the thing is in watching it. And as soon as the first goal went in, you could just feel that was it. The game was over. Like, you could just feel that kind of deflation of, well, we're not going to score, and this is a game that we're probably going to wind up losing. And this is as angry as I've seen a lot of my fellow fans, myself included, who take the time and effort to go the 4 hours over there, to support the team. And we always will support the team. And you always want to go over there and cheer on City.
Yeah.
But you also want to be paid back in a win. And if not a win, exciting soccer that was, that gives you something to cheer about. And we were, unfortunately, we're not rewarded with that. And so that can be frustrating. And so, we're going to have the same situation in a few months when we go to Chicago. There'll be a good crowd that goes up to watch the City play against the Fire. And hopefully, when you talk about these towns that are 4 hours away, that's, how you're able to get, these big crowds to go up there. But you want to see them play an entertaining style. You want, obviously we want them to win. But if they're not going to win, at least be interesting to watch.
Yeah.
And that's what they haven't been. Yeah. And so the Kansas game was frustrating on a couple different levels, just because tactically it made no sense what they were doing. And then you had players who were being put in positions where they're not really qualified to be playing those positions, unfortunately. And you feel bad for them on one hand, and on the other hand, they're paid to score goals, they're paid to win games, and they're not doing it. So
right. Yeah. It's just, Again, from my viewpoint, just the way you're talking, it's trying to fit guys into a almost system that's not working. I mean, I wouldn't say it's not working, um, but it's trying to put guys where they shouldn't be, where they don't belong necessarily, or they're playing out of position. Um,
Yeah, I mean,
on the
it's
field.
at a certain point you need to, and again, like I talked about earlier, we were told that he wasn't set on a one formation.
Yeah,
Like he was able to play different styles. Prove it. That's
right,
basically what the kind of the fans are saying, because we've been playing this same 3 center back, 2 wing back system, and that's fine when everybody's healthy.
right.
But when you're missing Thomas Tolton, who's your starting right back, when you're missing Jay Reed, who's your backup left back, who, like I
Mhm.
talked about, you can shift while I'm over. When you're missing Edward Leuven, when you're missing these guys, when you're missing Horn, who's one of your starting center backs,
Yeah,
when you're missing so many guys that you're now trying to take pieces and put them into those formational spots, when to me and to a lot of fans, it would make far more sense to say, okay, who do we have that's healthy?
right.
Who's available? And
Yeah,
what's
yeah,
the best formation to utilize those guys?
right. You adjust to
Not
the guys who you have, and not
exactly,
try to fit
exactly.
them into spots where they don't need to be.
Exactly.
Yeah,
The thing I can equate it to, and a lot of times I fall back, when I talk to some guys and, who, whether they watch a lot of soccer or not, it's
yeah,
always, sometimes good to make comparisons to other sports. Right.
yeah.
And so, for example, let's say your quarterback gets hurt, right? That's the guy who drives your offense. So
Mhm.
what do a lot of teams do in that situation? They go run heavy.
Yeah.
They try to take advantage of their other players in the things that those guys are good at
Mhm.
to minimize the impact of having somebody get hurt or somebody being out, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so you don't want one injury or 2 injuries to mean that you're making 6 changes,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's what's happening right now is one guy being injured is causing all these other shifts, when it's like, why not take a look and say, okay, here's the personnel that we have. What style fits their talents best?
Mhm.
And maybe he thinks that the 3 center back with 2 wing backs is what would fit their talents.
Right.
But when you're playing guys like Akil Watts at a wingback position, or Kyle Hebert at a wingback position, or Josh Yarrow is starting, I'm sorry, but and my amateur soccer brain just doesn't understand that. And
Yeah.
I'm not the only one, right? And so there are a lot of people who just look at it and say, yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And what's happening is, I think people are justifiably saying, hey, it's too early to judge Milberg. He's only had 7 games. Let's see how the season progresses.
Mhm.
So what a lot of what you're seeing a little bit now is that the people have to be able to focus their anger on something, whether
Yeah.
it's a player like Joe Klaus, who's not producing as a traditional number 9, or now what you're seeing is people who are questioning Lutz Pfannenstiel. Does he know what he's doing as far as constructing a roster, constructing a team?
Yeah.
He's the one that picked Melberg, and now Melberg's playing the style that we don't understand and is not having success. And so, yeah, I mean, it's, people want to be able to blame somebody when
Sure.
things like this happen, right? You know, everybody has a convenient scapegoat in John Mozeliak for the Cardinals, right? And Bill DeWitt, right? Those guys are
Mhm.
easy targets. When the Blues were struggling, everybody was like, is Doug
Yeah.
Armstrong kind of lost his touch, and so this is not uncommon,
Yeah.
right? But you want to give a guy obviously the benefit of the doubt, but again, if we're still if we're having this same conversation in a month after 4 more games of them not scoring or looking, anemic offensively, and having guys playing out of position or where they really shouldn't be playing,
Sure.
then the questions are really going to start. If the season 34 games long, so it's a long year, but if you get into the teens in games, if you're 14, 15 games in
Yeah.
and you're kind of still spinning your wheels, it's really difficult to recover from that. It
Yeah.
really is. Yeah.
It just, I mean, I had my train of thought there for a second, what I was thinking. Um, but what it was is that, to me, at least, if I would, and I don't necessarily watch as much as I probably, could or should.
Mhm.
I think I would personally rather lose with the young guys every week, like guys who I wanted, you want to see the development, you want to see those guys out on the field, than guys who aren't supposed to be, or not necessarily, but not that they can't play that position, but they shouldn't be in that position in the first place. Like I'd rather see the
Yeah,
young guys get out on the field
completely understand.
than
Yeah,
lose. I'd rather lose with those guys who are developing in that spot, because that is the future of the team.
yeah. I mean, this is never going to be a destination for your high-priced European free agent guys, right?
Yeah.
Messi, came over. He's not coming to St. Louis. He's
No.
not coming to Minneapolis. He's not coming to Kansas. Like
They're gonna go Miami.
those type of guys are gonna want to live in your cosmopolitan cities, in Miami, in a New York, in an LA,
Right.
those guys will go there.
Yeah.
Period. Okay. And so what city and a lot of the other Midwestern clubs or places that aren't necessarily destinations
Right.
to live in are going to have to rely on, and do have to rely on, are their academies.
Yeah.
Right. They're going to have player development that enhances their roster and forms the basis of their roster.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can go get and pick pieces off of other leagues and other teams, and and get those types of guys, right? Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's far too early to kind of throw the towel in on the season, obviously, and say, well, let's bring up all the kids and just play them. Like, no, we're not at that point yet, right? But what you do want to see is young players from the academy, whether it's a Tyson Pierce or a Caden Glover or Mekhi Joyner or even a Michael Wenzel. Like, you want to see those guys have some sort of impact with the big club.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because it does one of two things: either it's giving you somebody who can contribute and play minutes for you,
right,
or it's enhancing their value if you want to turn around and move them somewhere else.
Yeah,
right. But keeping these guys kind of under wraps doesn't enhance their value, doesn't increase their visibility. Mm-hmm. You're not giving them an opportunity to play against adults, which a lot of these kids need to do to get stronger and get used to playing against, men.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, you're hopeful that we get players in the academy who can come up and contribute, which we haven't really yet. And Perez was kind of a nice story for a little bit in 23,
right?
But he was being thrust into that kind of out of necessity. And also, when you're winning a lot of games, you can get away with bringing in guys and giving them minutes at the end of games when you're winning. Like, that's fun, right? But really, what you're hoping for is that some of these guys will actually start to contribute. That's what they need, right? Because it saves you on money. It saves you from transfer fees. It saves you from always having to go out and get guys from other leagues and you go through all that process. And you have the limited transfer windows, which we've talked about in the past, I mean, you want to see player development, and you need to see it, because they're not going to be in the market for super high price free agents. They're not going to be in the market for exotic, high big name guys. Like, the core of their team for sustainable success is going to have to come through the academy. Mm-hmm. It just is.
Right.
So,
that's just where my thought train would go with it is, again, I'd rather, not throw all the chips on the table and bring, necessarily bring all the young guys up. But at the same time, you're in a rough patch. You got to figure out something to do to kind of almost want to say spice things up or change things up a little bit.
Yeah. And that's the thing too, is like I mentioned before about they haven't played anybody under 25 yet.
Yeah.
Right. You can't really look at this team and figure out, okay, who's like the core of this club right now, because your best player overall, who is Roman Berkey, your goalie, obviously he's hurt. He's in a contract year. Yeah. This is the last year of his contract. You hope that they're going to work out a contract with him and get an extension signed. But that has to be a two-way street. He has to want to stay here. They have to want to keep him, and they have to cooperate. They have to kind of agree on a number and a contract term. And there's no guarantee of that. right? Your best outfield player is Hartle, and yes, they've got him signed for several years, but they don't really have anybody under contract for an extended period of time outside of him. Teuchert's here for a little bit,
Yeah.
But a lot of these guys are on 1 or 2 years left in their deals, and so you look at it and you say, okay, who's your core? And is your core already too old, or is going to be aged out by the time they're going to be competitive if this kind of trend continues?
Right.
So it's definitely hanging in the balance right now. You could see this go one of two ways this season. Like I said, we've talked about the next 5 games, and then you have Kansas, and then the 2 games after that are Minnesota and Colorado, and both of those are good clubs, right? Minnesota has traditionally had a lot of success against us. Colorado, we played them early in the year and played them to a draw.
Sure.
But they're a quality side. And so, you have a stretch of games right now where they need to overperform not only what they've been doing so far this year, but they need to get points however they can get them. In order to really save their season, because, this could go downhill very quickly. I'm not trying to be super overly negative, but as a realist, you look at those games and you say, okay, where are the chances to get points in the next 5 games or next 6 games, next 8 games? There's not going to be that many. Right. And so, it's almost a situation where if Melberg decides, okay, we need to kind of throw caution to the wind and lose a game 4-3 or lose a game 3-2 or 4-2, but we're making progress in developing offensively, even though we lost, that's still going to be more palatable, I think, than a 0-0 draw to some people or a 1-0 loss. Right.
Yeah.
If they're showing progress offensively, even if it's a loss, people will accept that.
Yeah.
Okay. But if it's more of the same, if it's 1-0, 2-0 loss, 3-1, like, people are not going to be, as patient as I think you would expect them to be.
Yeah. No, that makes sense to me, at least, and whatnot. We talk about the Columbus game for a few minutes here. What are so just look into it. Obviously, it's a tough game. You get Azil Jackson and that whole crew. Literally the
Columbus old friend crew. AZ.
Back, they're coming to St. Louis for this one too, which might necessarily help City in this case with this game. There's some keys to just some of the keys for you that City needs to do to at least hopefully get a win, but possibly get a draw.
Yeah. Well, first off, this is, again, if you're semi interested in soccer or, you need something to watch on Sunday night, I would encourage you to watch the game. They're fun. Columbus is just the style they play is fun to watch. They're very entertaining, like I said, and so they'll be worth watching. City, I think, they're going to need to decide, I think, up front when it comes to his tactics and his formation that he starts with.
Sure.
We'll kind of tell the story, right? If it's a 5-4-1 again, then what he's telling us is we're going to try to win this or tie or get a 0-0 tie or win 1-0, which is a big gamble because it's very difficult to shut that team down for an entire game. They're just that talented offensively. And the problem with playing that style, and it's already kind of reared its ugly head, is when you're playing to try to limit and be so defensive, not only what you're doing is you're saying, okay, we're only maybe going to have 2 or 3 chances in the game offensively. Okay. And if we don't convert, we're screwed. Okay. Right. That's exactly what happened against Kansas. We had 3 really good chances. We didn't convert on any of them. Okay. Yeah. What you're also doing is saying we're going to be defending the entire game, which is physically tiring. And if we make one mental or physical mistake and it leads to a goal, you're asking your defenders to be perfect. And that's difficult to do for 90 minutes plus. Okay. And so, and that's what happened so far. That's what happened, against Austin. It's what happened against Philly. It's what happened against Kansas. People make one mistake and it burns them. But when you're playing that defensive, now all of a sudden you're not creating enough opportunities. You're not moving the ball through the midfield well enough to create chances to create a quantity of chances, a quantity of shots, and convert them. And so it's going to be super interesting to see what kind of the rosters. The lineups always come out in MLS an hour before the game starts, right? So an hour before the game starts, you always see everybody pull their phones out. Okay, who's starting? What's the bench look like? What's the formation? And so at 5:00 on Saturday, it's going to be or Sunday, actually, Sunday night game.
Yeah,
it's going to be super interesting to see what that formation is, because if it's a 5-4-1 again, then you're going to have a lot of people who are like, okay, we're already a little grumpy because we're going into this game with the intention of mucking it up, dulling it down, and trying to bore Columbus into submission.
Sure.
If they come out and you see a starting lineup that includes like a Celio and a Klaus and maybe Simon Betcher and Hartle, and they go a little more offensive, again, I think that you can, there are ties that feel like wins, and there are ties that feel like losses, right? We've talked about that before.
Mm-hmm.
Getting a tie, even though it's at home, against this Columbus team, considering where City is at in their season, the way things have gone, that would feel like a win against that team. It would absolutely feel like a win, right? And so I think, if you go in and you say, okay, we can be aggressive and we can try to get a 1-1 tie or a 2-2 tie, people would go out of there being happy, I think. Yep. If you said that ahead of time. So yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh no, you're fine. I'm a dog owner too. It's okay.
Yeah, I don't know what necessarily is going on, but all right.
No, I'll be
all right. Yeah, I mean, it just seemed hopefully they can some kind of offensive push going.
Because what you're seeing, the thing that they ran into, unfortunately, last year, was that they were so bad offensively that it removed any danger at all from the equation of what the opposing team had to plan for.
Yeah.
They were so thin. They had so many injuries. Had certain games where you're starting Nakvi Thorson at striker, who's not a striker, in any way, shape, or form. You're playing a guy at striker in MLS and starting him who's a borderline substitute winger, a guy who's not in the league anymore and probably will never be back in MLS. Right. And so these teams that we were playing against had no fear. They could come down and not be afraid of any kind of a counterattack. They were not afraid of what we could do offensively, right? Yeah. Which meant that you're playing the entire bulk of the game in our half, right? And defending and defending and defending. That's extremely hard to do, right? Is to defend for that long and to bunker up for that long. And so I think that, what has hurt City this year, and this goes back to some of the questions that are being asked of Lutz Pfannenstiel in his bringing together of this roster, is City does not have a lot of foot speed. They just don't. They don't have much speed, and they're not fast, which means that when they're getting the ball on turnovers or they're getting the ball defensively, what they are not able to do is immediately go back upfield and put pressure on a team or counterattack very quickly.
Yeah.
It's letting teams get back defensively and get their shape, which is half of the battle in soccer. If you're able to get back on defense and form just like basketball, right?
Yeah.
Fast break points are because there's chaos defensively because guys are out of position. They don't know where the ball's going. Right, soccer is the same way. Is if you're able to get back on defense and set up your structure, it's a lot harder than when you're trying to run and get into space. The soccer field is huge, right? And there's all kinds of space if you find it. So really what the downside so far has been of having a bunch of guys on the team who are good in possession, relatively, but not have foot speed, is that it's the counterattack is too slow.
Yeah.
And so what I could see happening in this Columbus game is Columbus spends the entire time basically in our half with the ball, and the rare opportunities that we do have to counterattack, we don't do it quickly enough, or we are lacking the foot speed to do that. And so that's why I'm going to be super interested to see, okay, is Cedric Teuchert able to start and play, 90 or 75 minutes? Where's Hartle going to be? Because Lubin's still out. Obviously with his personal problems, personal situation, I think, with his wife and her illness, unfortunately. But Hartle is our best offensive player overall. He does not need to be basically playing the defensive midfield. Like that makes no sense. He needs to be up. He needs to be where he can be distributing the ball, where he can be creating. Celio needs to play. Like, there's all these guys that you can point at and say, okay, Melberg, go a little more offensive.
Sure.
And help us create offense to get the pressure off of our defense. Yeah. Because if we're not creating any offensive chances at all, it's like a vice tightening. Mm-hmm. Columbus will just keep pushing us down the field to the point where we're backed up in our own goal defending.
Right.
And they're too good to play that style against. Right. So we will need to show some sort of offensive threat in order to kind of keep them at bay, to make them at least concerned defensively.
Yeah.
Because if they're just walking the ball up the field and we're spending all of our time defending, it's going to be a long night.
Yeah. At some point you're going to break. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's inevitable. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing is you're hopeful that he puts guys in a position, and also the other thing too, and it's not all about Melberg or Lutz. These guys also have to do their jobs.
Sure.
Right? They also have to perform. And as great as Wallem was, he missed a goal that should have been scored.
Right.
And Watts, again, I don't think he's a starting level right wing back. He got put in that position. He basically could have just tapped the ball in, and he didn't against Kansas, and it cost us a goal. And so there's been multiple opportunities now where guys have just not succeeded, not done what they need to do. So at the end of the day, obviously the coach can only do so much and the players have to perform. Right. But it's a combination of both right now. It's lack of performance. And also I think it's a lack of tactical, willingness to adapt tactically to the roster and what's going on. So,
right.
We'll see, because Columbus is obviously a tough test. It's by far the strongest team we played all year.
Yeah.
And then it doesn't get any easier the next week, which is Vancouver, which is a team that has traditionally played us very, very strong.
Yeah. Yeah. Even last year when it was last year, the year before, Vancouver wasn't, I think it was last year, towards the end of last year, they were playing better. They weren't necessarily, the table, they weren't in the greatest spot, but they were playing better. So I almost had better hockey. I'm thinking Vancouver.
We're gearing up for hockey playoffs. We're getting close.
Yeah. Better soccer than
and frankly, thank God for the Blues right now, because with City struggling, and we know what's going to happen with the Cardinals this year. Like,
it's not been pretty so far.
No, it's probably only going to get worse. So thank God for what the Blues have been doing. Right. I think the other two teams should be appreciative of what the Blues are doing, which is taking some of the narrative and distracting people from what's been going on. Right. With the struggles of the other two clubs, and which is exactly what happened 2 years ago when City was so good. And the Blues were kind of up and down that year, and the Cardinals were bad. But everybody's like, well, it's okay because City's this new, shiny, awesome thing, and everybody's interested in that. And you probably had the Cardinals saying, woof, they're not all over us because they're distracted. So, it is good to have the Blues, doing their thing right now. But obviously we're looking at a rough stretch that hopefully that City finds a way to get through it. Like you said, Vancouver and that situation, they have Brian White, who's one of their strikers, who absolutely owns us. Nobody has had more success against us than he has. I believe he scores 6 goals in 4 games against us. He just kills us. And so, I don't ever really have much confidence in them playing in Vancouver. Now, it's a home game.
Right.
So we don't have to go up and play at BC Place and that terrible carpeting that they have in that stadium. We don't have to deal with that. But it's still, they're playing lights out this year. That's a core of a team. And we talked a little bit earlier about the core of City and who it is, and we don't really know, right? That core of Vancouver has been together for like 3 seasons now.
Yeah.
Like the core group that they have has been together for such a long time that you've really seen them kind of not be great and then getting better and better and better. And now they're, one of the best teams in the West. And you see that with clubs sometimes. It just takes a little while. It takes several years to work that together. But the core's been, their core players have been together for so long now that it's like, it makes sense that they're good because they're good players. It just took that time to develop. Right. So, So as far as the next 2 weeks, you're going to see 2 good teams come in here. Hopefully City can wind up with some points out of it. I think getting a tie against Columbus and then a tie. If honestly, you don't ever want to just shoot for ties at home, like I said, but
Right.
if they come out of the next 2 games with 2 points or more, that's a win,
Yeah.
right? To me, that's an absolute win.
Yeah. One of those situations. It's kind of like I don't want to say win-win, but hey, like, no, we win. If we draw, we win too.
It's still kind of a win. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because again, like I said, you're early year, you can do yourself a big favor by accumulating points. But if you're dropping points left and right, you just have such a struggle catching back up again because there's just too many teams to climb over. There's too much parity in the league and the conference. There's no real weak spots in the West. San Jose is better this year. Kansas is really the one that's a mess. Houston's not very good either, but there's not a lot of teams that you look at and go, okay, they're really, really bad.
Right.
We just lost to one of those teams, 5 days ago. Right. So, the longer this goes on, the more that you look at City and go, okay, maybe we're the ones that are not very good. And that's unexpected because coming into this year, I think most fans and most pundits and experts said this is a solid playoff team. That's certainly where I had them. But again, that's with the expectation that you're going to be scoring goals. And to have the struggles offensively that they had has just been such a shock to everybody. Right. And so I think the first thing they can do to kind of alleviate that is to start scoring goals, even if it doesn't mean wins. I think, just to start being more productive offensively will calm down everybody a little bit. Even if it doesn't equate to wins early. So.
Yeah, you get the little bit of a chip off your shoulder, and you put the first one in, and you haven't scored in a while. So yeah, it would be nice to see too this Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hopeful that they can put on a good performance because what you don't want is to get embarrassed on national television, coming off what was an embarrassing performance last Saturday.
Right.
You don't want it to happen in front of an even bigger crowd by a way, way, way better team.
Yeah.
In Columbus. And so, I mean, it will be a real test for the club, for their mental kind of fortitude.
Sure.
One of the things that they have gotten criticized for in the past is not being mentally strong. That was a big criticism a couple years ago. Last year, you saw some of that criticism creep in even last Saturday of, they gave up the first goal and the whole team, you just sensed the deflation.
You could like, see even just the highlights, you could feel it.
Yeah, it's like, like you can't be mentally weak and have success. And so if they go down early, look out. Like that's, now they might be able to show something. And obviously it's going to be a pretty fired up crowd. And it's going to be a great atmosphere like it always is at Energizer Park.
Sure.
But I think, they need to have some early success. And what I mean by success is score a goal. I think people are obviously desperate for that kind of excitement and that hunger to have something to show for one of these games other than just a bunch of near misses. So if they're able to score early, I think the vibes and the mood in that stadium will just be amplified.
Yeah.
If it gets to halftime and it's still 0-0, you're gonna see a lot of people who are just like, here we go again with this, right? And you fall into that same pattern, and then you wind up, you're just waiting at that point for Columbus to break through and get a goal or two, and it's going to be 1 or 2 nothing, and that's what you want to avoid.
Yeah. I get that. I really do. The wrap things up here with this one here.
Sure.
Chris, I appreciate you jumping on with us or jumping on with me at least. And, here at STL Sports, we try to keep up with everything going on around St. Louis with the professional sports at least, and whatever we can. It's always good to hear your inside thoughts and whatnot of City. Hopefully they can get a win Sunday against Columbus. It'd be nice to see. I imagine you're going to be there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I'm not going to miss, not going to miss it. Obviously we're fortunate enough to have season tickets and so, going to, we'll be at every home game this year, assuming obviously no situations like last year.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, obviously we'll be there and for sure for every home game, and then obviously the Chicago trip is one we're looking forward to, and there may be another one or two mixed in there somewhere, and obviously we also have the U.S. Open Cup, that city's gonna play in this year, so that may be obviously you would imagine you're probably going to be at home for the first round of that, when City plays in it, but if they're not, it'd be kind of interesting to maybe wind up going somewhere cool, and seeing if City does wind up playing in a smaller stadium or in a different city than we normally would in MLS. So that would be pretty cool. I know, there's people are like, oh yeah, it'd be great to, get drawn against a Tulsa or an Indy or, to see, to go to one of these other places. So that, we'll look and see, obviously once US Open Cup gets closer, what kind of schedule that has.
Sure.
But yeah, obviously definitely going to be there Sunday and screaming and yelling just like we always do. So for sure.
Yeah. So you'll see City SC take on the Columbus Crew this Sunday, 6:30 or 6 o'clock is the match time start according to ESPN.
They never start on time.
They never do. Same thing with hockey. It's like, they're like, okay, puck drop 7 o'clock. Okay, it's like 7:15.
Yeah,
give or take.
They've never started on time ever. It just doesn't happen. And so it's listed as 6 o'clock start. It will not start at 6. I can guarantee you that. So there will be no kicking of the ball before probably about 6:10. 6:05 to 6:10 at the earliest. So but Sunday night. And again, you'll be able to watch it. It's the Sunday night game. So it's a great environment, and you're going to get to see a team that is desperate, hopefully, in City, and hopefully plays like it against one of the best teams in the league. So
it'll be fun. We appreciate everybody tuning in, whoever did tune in with us here for this first, I guess, the debut episode of the City SC show. My name is Brandon. It's Chris, and thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks again, Brandon.